We begin with Ed O'Keefe at the White House. Ed, great to see you. Catch us up on the latest in regards to the Epstein files, White House maneuvers, and a lawsuit with a very important media company.
That's right. Well, the president has essentially told the attorney general, of course, you can release or seek the release of everything that was given to the grand jury back in the day. And so the Justice Department's working on that. Questions were asked here today about whether he wants everything released. And the White House said, look, the president has told the Justice Department and the FBI if they believe that everything needs to be released, then they can seek the release of it all. But punted that down the street to the Justice Department and the FBI, which is notable because after more than a week of this, it seems they're finally trying to push it off to other places. You did mention that lawsuit. He filed suit against the Wall Street Journal for a story that broke late last week regarding an alleged drawing that he made for Jeffrey Epstein as part of an album of letters that were given to him at the turn of the 21st century. The president disputing that that was real and filed suit pretty quickly thereafter. The Wall Street Journal vowing to fight that suit. We'll see how far that one goes. Word also came today that the Wall Street Journal will not be part of the traveling press corps when the president heads to Scotland later this week to inspect his golf courses and to meet with the British Prime Minister, a sign that they are facing some consequences for the reporting of their colleagues, not unlike what happened to the Associated Press and other news outlets, but we'll see how much farther it goes beyond that.
Ed, as you know, there is a garish tendency in Washington to obsess over the politics, and in the Epstein matter, that has been true. But I don't want to lose the victims in all this. The victims matter. They're trying to get some transparency and maybe some application of justice. But nevertheless, the political component of the story still lives on. And the question persists, how has the Epstein story affected loyalty within the MAGA base? Do we have an assessment of that today that is slightly different than we might have had midweek last week?
Well, we see a little bit of a split, according to the new CBS News poll. While the MAGA base is standing with the president, the broader Republican Party has some concerns. The GOP splits 50 to 49% on the question of whether it's satisfied with how the president is handling the Epstein case. When you dive into those figures, you find 60% of so-called MAGA Republicans, his most diehard supporters, are satisfied with how he's handling it, but 41% of those non-MAGA Republicans are satisfied. And also notable, while 36% of all respondents think the Epstein case matters a lot, just 11% of Republicans think so. 54% don't think it matters at all. But part of the reason, I think this is important, it keeps coming up, it's not because we're reporting on it necessarily, but because the president himself is the one that keeps bringing it up, whether in social media posts, whether in calling on the attorney general to seek the release of all that information given to the grand jury. It's the president that's been driving this as a conversation starter and as an issue that needs to be covered further, which is why it was interesting today to see the White House push off those questions about details to the Justice Department and the FBI. Perhaps a shift and a realization they've got to get on to other issues if they want this issue to at least fall into the background.
Comprehensive as always. Ed O'Keefe on the North Lawn of the White House. Thank you so very much. Tennessee Republican Congressman Tim Burchett joins me now. Congressman, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us here on The Takeout. You are a co-sponsor of legislation called the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Based on what's happened so far, yes, has the administration met the demands, the desires of that Transparency Act?
Well, I think it's a good start. I don't think you're ever going to get to the bottom of this thing, just like this town never gives up its secrets very, very quick, or if they do it all, like case in point, the Kennedy assassination. Lee Harvey Oswald was supposed to have made a shot that entered the front and the back of President Kennedy's body, and then they find this basically unscathed bullet on a gurney in Texas, and we're still studying that, and nobody's willing to come forward with that. So, I mean, you know, and of course, and I get the Democrats. They went 4 years and didn't do anything about it. Dick Durbin made a big deal about basically talking down to my senator, Senator Blackburn, when she was trying to get flight logs and things like that released, and now he's claiming that he was trying to do it all along or something. I can't quite figure that out. And the only thing I can really figure out is that we need to quit pointing fingers. I realize the Democratic Party is not doing so well. I mean, the biggest candidate they got in the country is, you know, people are saying he's a communist, and you say, no, wait a minute, I'm not a communist, I'm a socialist, as if that's a selling point. And so everybody's just looking for cover. And the truth is, we need to just get to the bottom of it. And my biggest concern in this whole thing, because I'm one that I'm heavily invested in this issue. When I was in the state legislature, I sponsored many bills castrating child molesters, going after child porn distributors, the first ICAC laws, I think maybe in the country, some of them, internet crimes against children, things like that, and distribution, going after those people. And so I've held the hand of people that have been molested, and they carry a life sentence, and it's not right. And we need to send those people a message that we stand by them, and we need to send the dirtbags in this world that we need to be sending to hell, like Epstein, who I'm sure that's where he is right now. This activity is not okay, and we're not going to okay it. But I would warn people, they want to get a hold of these flight logs, and I get that. But the truth is, a lot of people on those flight logs are going to be innocent. They're not, I mean, you know, just because they didn't have to go to the island. If they flew from Florida to New York or somewhere in between on that plane, you know, that doesn't mean they're a pedophile. And you know, who knew Epstein was involved with this until the news broke on him? So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, and I hope that we move forward in a judicious manner. And I think the president's move with the Attorney General Bondi is the correct move, and I think it's a move in the right direction.
Were you insulted when the president said that those expressing opinions like you just did had fallen for the Democratic hoax and need to move on?
Not really. Look, my skin's about that thick. I've been in Congress for a long time. I got an 18-year-old daughter, dude. I think I can handle a little criticism. But no, you know, it's the game you play up here. And honestly, the one thing Trump does is, dadgum, he wins. You can say what you want to about him, but you know, we're Iran's nuclear situation. He drops a bomb, huge operation. No Americans lose their lives. The big beautiful bill. He wants to get it signed on the 4th of July. No way that's going to happen. Boom. Trump gets involved. It's there. The cryptocurrency bill, my own Senator Hagerty's involvement there, that deal was not going to happen. The president wanted it on his desk by last Friday. I'm sitting in a room with a group of very conservative Republicans, myself, Whip Emmert, Speaker Johnson, and lo and behold, the president calls and starts answering everybody's dadgum question. And guess what? They ended up passing that bill, and guess what? The president signed it on Friday. So he definitely has a strategy in this, and it's winning, and he does a very good job at it. Critics aside, he keeps winning, and America responds to that. And I think we're moving in the right direction, but do I think we'll ever get all the answers? No, because in my mind, I'm thinking the Biden administration had this thing for 4 years, and if they had anywhere near Donald Trump, you know they would have released that stuff, but they didn't. And now we don't know what files we've got have been tampered with. And, you know, this town is crooked as a dog's leg, brother. And we need to realize that and figure out what we can do with it.
You spoke eloquently a moment ago about your long involvement on this issue of those who have been victims of either sex trafficking or molestation by adults. When the Trump administration in its two-page memo said there were more than 1,000 victims, that surprised people who were very, very familiar with this Epstein matter. And that led them to wonder if there are not avenues of prosecution for accomplices of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And that the evidence that the Trump administration has yet to release might lead to successful prosecution of accomplices. I'm trying to focus on the victims here. The politics are the politics. They will run their course. But if these files are not released and prosecutions aren't commenced, are victims being mishandled by the justice system?
I think quite a lot. I think they get abused a second time, maybe not as bad as the first time. But again, I think we need to be very cautious in these files that we do not release, because these were children at the time. Now, of course, they're adults, maybe 30s, 40s, but they still carry those scars, mostly internal. And I would dare say that I think we should err on the side of caution. And two, you're going to find out a lot of these people do not want to come forward, and they will not come forward for fear of not just retribution, but shame. And that's just a disgrace to our country and where we are as a nation now. We ought to embrace these people and love them, because they are innocent in this thing, because some dirtbag took advantage of them. And I can talk about the mind issues and all that, and the scars these people carry. I've studied it for years. Hey, look, when I live in a very conservative area, West Knoxville in East Tennessee, And you know, dadgummit, when I proposed some of this legislation, I got calls from people in my neighborhood that I knew that had been abused. I was on several different media outlets where people that were interviewing me, literally after the cameras stopped rolling and then we walked away, they confided me in the fact that they'd been abused. This is an epidemic across our country, and part of it is the stigma we attach to it. And every time we try to brush something like this away or blame the victim or anything, to me, it just sends this thing further and further down a hole. And again, I'm not being over boisterous and being a redneck, but I think we need to arrange a meeting with these people and the devil as soon as possible, because they are on a straight path to hell as far as I'm concerned. And look, I'm going to meet my maker one day. Jesus had a saying about how you treat the least amongst you. And surely these little people are the least amongst us. And I honestly don't want to meet my maker one day. And he said, what did you do for the least amongst us? I want to say, well, dadgummit, I kept my word and I went after the people that went after them. And I would hope I could do that with a clear conscience. And that's not being overzealous or anything. Yes.
Even if that gets you crossways with the Trump Justice Department.
I'll ultimately answer to the Lord, sir. And I dare say that is going to be, that would weigh on my conscience a lot more than making political points. And I get it. Look, this game, it's tough to raise money. It's even tougher for somebody like me because when I take on the machine. But I'm not crosswise with Trump at anything on this. I think he's going about it the right way. I think these files need to be released, the ones that he's talking about. And I think that is a great start and a great sign to this country, because the Biden administration had 4 years and didn't do anything.
Congressman Tim Burchett, Tennessee. I appreciate it, sir. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, brother. It's been a pleasure. And good luck on your show. I'm digging it.
Thank you.